Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Got my coffee cup. Actually, an old coffee cup. This is our 50th anniversary church coffee cup. We just did 60 years, so got a 10 plus year old coffee cup. Luckily, the coffee inside is nice and fresh, giving me that little oomph I need this morning. Maybe you need it as well. Thanks for taking a few minutes to spend these times with me. We call it Coffee with PC for the aforementioned coffee in the cup. And we've been going through kind of for a while, just looking at how Matthew describes the life and ministry of Jesus. And lately we're kind of toward the end of the story. Things in this section, the last couple of chapters of Matthew, just a lot of well-known things that most people may be associated, if you've been around church world for a while, with Jesus happen here. And today we're looking at this moment where Jesus goes with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, you probably know this because, obviously going to the Holy Land, going to Israel is a very popular tourist spot, but you can go to the Garden of Gethsemane. It is a place that is traditionally thought where Jesus prayed. Actually, they have, I believe it's a stone where they think he kneeled against. I'm not so sure about that, in a little building. My favorite parts, if you've been around and heard me talk about this before, are the most natural parts. And one of the remarkable things about the Garden of Gethsemane is that it's an olive garden, by the way. Gethsemane means olive press. That's what the word means. So it's the garden where they press the olives. So you would expect olive trees. And there are trees in that garden that are 2,000 plus years old. Still trees, still producing olive trees that would have potentially been there when Jesus himself was there praying here in this account in Matthew 26, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Really remarkable to go and to be in that place, especially as we think about the events that happened there and shortly thereafter. It was a key time in his life. We've already talked over the last few weeks. We're talking about the Lord's Supper, Peter's denial. We're talking about these things that point to his death. And Jesus' death is the thing his life has pointed toward. In fact, I believe it's Luke that says in one of the verses early in his account of the life of Jesus, it says, Jesus set his face steadfastly toward Jerusalem. The purpose with which Jesus goes into Jerusalem on these final days, this final week of his life, knowing what is coming, is really remarkable when you think about it. And that's really what's happening here in the Garden of Gethsemane, because it's in the garden that Jesus goes to pray. But what is interesting to me is the fact that he tells his disciples, it says that he says to them that he's sorrowful, he's troubled, he is overwhelmed with sorrow. He says, Jesus, in probably one of the moments in his ministry that we see his humanity. A lot of times when we talk about Jesus, we emphasize his divinity, that he is God in the flesh, the Word that became flesh. He's the Son of God, God incarnate. And that's a vitally important reality. But we don't want to diminish the fact that he was also human. He was 100% God and 100% human, is kind of the way we say the hypostatic union, if you want to use a term that theologians sometimes use, between humanity and divinity. Jesus, in this moment, we see a little bit of that humanity in him, because being Jesus, being divine, he knows what's coming. And he's already told his disciples about it. He's warned them several times. And even at the Last Supper, he's hinted at, we're right on the precipice of what will be a very difficult time. So this is weighing on him, as he knows he's just hours from his arrest and from all that will follow that, from the physical toll that will be taken on his body in the very near future. But as much, I think, of the physical toll, we also have to talk about the emotional, the spiritual toll that is taken on him, because one of the realities that we often talk about with Jesus going to the cross is that he bears the sin of humanity. Paul writes it this way: he who knew no sin became sin. That on the cross, Jesus takes onto himself that humanity. And here in the garden, he calls his disciples to them, and he asks them to watch and to pray with him. And he goes by himself and he falls down, and he's got this incredible outpouring of grief and asking God for help. In fact, one of the things that he says is, Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, or may this cup pass from me. Now that word cup, it's kind of an appropriate metaphor that he uses, because you can go into some of the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, and see that not always, but sometimes the cup is used symbolically, and even I think in the book of Revelation, it's used the same way. It's often pictured as the cup that holds God's wrath, that God's wrath is in this cup that will be poured out on evildoers. Maybe you look at Psalm 75 verse 8, or you could look at Jeremiah 25:15, just a couple of verses that speak of the fact that here in this cup is contained the wrath of God that will be poured out. And so when Jesus says, let this cup, maybe he has in mind those images from the Hebrew Bible that point to the cup of God's wrath coming on him. Or maybe we'd go not so far back. We don't have to go back several hundred years to prophets or psalmists. We can go back just a few hours to when Jesus is with his disciples around that table, taking the Passover with them. And even just a few verses before, where he talks about this cup. This is the cup that's my blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins. The cup in his celebration of the supper specifically pointed to his blood poured out, the suffering that he would undergo. And so here in the garden, the full reality of that is weighing upon him. And he looks to his disciples, his closest companions, and asks them to pray. And what do? Yep, if you know the story, they fall asleep. So true confessions, who hasn't fallen asleep while praying? Maybe it's because it's a late hour. Maybe it's just very late after a several hour Passover dinner. Maybe it's the full belly after that celebratory meal with all of the food and the wine that they take, and it just kind of overcomes them. They don't maybe feel the intensity that Jesus does, because they've just had this celebratory moment, and they're falling asleep, and Jesus tries to wake them up and says, stay. And on 3 different occasions, he goes back to prayer. And each of those times, his prayer is to the Father, if there's any way that this cup can pass from me, may it be. His idea being, in my humanity, as I consider what I will face, it seems unbearable. But the greatest prayer Jesus prayed, and it's the prayer all of us can pray from times in our life when things are difficult, is nevertheless not my will, but yours be done. When we face a crisis, when we face difficulty, we pray, God, if there's any way this can get better, if there's any way this can be resolved favorably, we would be thrilled. Whether it's a medical condition or a relationship trouble or something physical that comes upon us, any of those things, we can pray that. But ultimately, I have to pray, not my will, but yours be done. And Jesus demonstrates that. Jesus, in this moment of wrestling, we might say, with God, seeing the temptation to, is there any other way this can happen? Ultimately has to do what all of us must do, and understand the will of the Father and submit to the will of the Father. And Jesus does that. And all that we are as Christians, all that we have in our faith, depends on his willingness to pray that prayer, not my will, but thine be done. Because it's what he does next, when he's arrested, when he's tried, when he's beaten, when he's crucified and died and buried, that is the moment where he became sin, who knew no sin, so that you and I, Paul would write, can become the righteousness of God. We inherently are sinful, and Jesus was not. He was tempted in every way we are, but was without sin. And so he goes to the cross, bearing the sin of the world, my sin and the sin of the world, and invites us by faith to trust him and receive his forgiveness and salvation, accomplished by who he is and by what he did on the cross. As I say a lot of times at the end of our few minutes together on Coffee with PC, that's what we talk about at our church. We talk about who Jesus is and what he has done for us, that he is the Son of God. He's the Word that became flesh, God incarnate, that lived a sinless life, that died a sacrificial death on the cross, bearing the sins of the world, and that was raised again. And it's through faith in him that we have a restored relationship with the holy God, because we receive forgiveness and salvation. Not because of anything meritorious about us, not because we kind of get our act together and behave better and go to church and pray. No, but because we place our faith in who Jesus is and in what he did for us. We talk about that all the time. We're going to be talking about it this Sunday, and we invite you, if you're able, come on down. 9 o'clock on Sundays, we'll be here worshiping together, learning together about who Jesus is and what he came to do. Hope you can join us. But right now, I'm sure you're like me, have a lot of things to do on this day, so I'm going to finish the last sip of my cup of coffee and get back to it. Hope you have a great day, and really would love to see you join us on Sunday. We'll save a seat for you. Thanks so much.